The third generation Mercedes ML was produced from July 2011 for the 2012 model year and continued with the ML name until it was facelifted in 2015 when it became the GLE to conform with Mercedes' new naming convention for all SUVs. Since then, the ML name has not returned, making it easy for used buyers to know which version of this generation they are buying, as the earlier cars are ML and later GLE. As an aside, this is the last generation that has a platform share with Chrysler, but the core is a partnership between the brands and it finds its way onto the WK2 Jeep Grand Cherokee and the Dodge Durango. The interesting aspect for Mercedes buyers is that while the core platform is modified to their specification, it does mean that many of Jeep's underlying needs for off-road performance are built into the backbone of this generation GLE, which is useful if you really do find yourself having to do some off-road driving away from sealed roads. This is also the first GLE to be offered in two body variants for mass sale. Chassis code W166 is the conventional SUV, while C292 is the coupe SUV. The coupe model enters showrooms upon the facelift of the GLE and continues sale, the longest, with the last units leaving the factory in late 2019. The facelift didn't just bring in a new body style, but a new engine array, focusing on downsizing and increasing efficiency, while China gets its own variation of one of the power plants, that being the smaller 3-litre bi-turbo, which is detuned for the Chinese market and usually found in smaller Mercedes models. We'll come on to engines later in the guide, but diesel buyers should note that the powertrain has little change to the official power ratings over production, as the focus shifted to limiting emissions rather than improving performance. Used buyers should note that either a 7-speed or 9-speed transmission are the only options on this generation GLE, and several key areas were improved over the previous generation to meet customer feedback, including increased legroom, a comprehensive package called On and Off Road to meet demands of customers that need wider abilities from an SUV, to include underbody skid plates and 2-speed transfer case with center diff locks, along with added comfort features including the optional adaptive cruise control that really allowed long-distance driving without touching the throttle. For those looking at a diesel, a reminder that Euro 6 compliance for diesel city emissions rules is of late 2015, and so almost certainly all facelift cars, but not the earlier ML. However, by far and away the most important market for the GLE is the USA, where this isn't a consideration, and US buyers will find that 2013 and then 2016 were the hottest sales years, and so you'll find the widest choice in those years if shopping for a particular colour or specification. Speaking of specification, the GLE and ML were sold in a variety of trim names across the world, but a good guide to follow is starting at the base models are generally equipped with a V6 petrol engine in North America, and there is a V6 diesel for most of Europe, along with Australia and New Zealand, which is also joined by a smaller 4-cylinder diesel entry model. In Europe, these are sold as either SE or SE Executive, and can be upgraded to AMG Sport or AMG Line trim. However, in the Middle East, trim is narrower with a base model and then an AMG appearance package either being a popular choice, or in some countries this was standard equipment, while the USA usually only badged cars with their engine and then 4MATIC, and diesel models were offered initially adding BlueTec to the name before being simplified to a lowercase d. Most US states were able to sell a premium package numbered 1, 2 and 3 with spec rising across numbers and bundling items like keyless go, surround view cameras and panoramic sunroof. There were also a sport package, and then the US and Europe were offered a night package, while the Designo editions were offered across global markets. In some markets this is called the AMG Night or AMG Designo. The plus for US buyers was equipment options were open as long as the engine could support the option in North America, while in Europe options were directed towards a package or trim and gradually opened up as you move up the trim profile, but this did mean that generally speaking European models have less variance in trim but are slightly higher equipped. However, US buyers can look for smaller engines that have every option ticked if they want more gas mileage, but all the options. A quick note here is that due to international delivery timing, you'll find that in 2015, the name change year for Europe from the ML to GLE, while the US sold the ML models through 2015 and into very early 2016. Wheel sizing can be as small as 18 inches, but most ML models will have the 19-inch wheels. These become standard size on the GLE, and upgrades include a step up to the 20-inch designs and even a 21-inch wheel on AMG models, or select markets were offered optional 21-inch wheels towards the end of production. At the top of the tree there is an AMG and then an AMG S model. The ML63 could be purchased with optional performance package. A note for those choosing between a late ML AMG and early GLE AMG is the addition of engineering improvements to the gearbox, which improved the shift speed. On to safety, and a full 5 stars at Euro NCAP, followed by North American IIHS, giving it a top rating of good in various crash tests and awarding the facelifted GLE a top safety pick plus award. Aussie New Zealander ANCAP also gave the car 5 stars. Now on to the common faults, and a reminder to add a like if you find the video helpful, so YouTube knows it's worth showing to others. And consider subscribing for more videos, as you never know what car you may want a buyer's guide for next. We also have memberships available for both YouTube and Patreon for exclusive content. Now we'll jump into the list, and I've organised them from the more common reported and then rarer as we go along. No issues are guaranteed, but this is a good list to check for. Reports of the Airmatic air suspension either leaking from the lines or the compressor were reported. Usually the obvious sign is a corner of the car has dipped down overnight, showing where the issue is, so try and see it for car first thing in the morning if you can, before it has been driven. Resolutions fall into 3 areas. Either the compressor is failing with age and can either be replaced or sometimes repaired. Then there are the air lines, or the struts themselves leaking, or a height sensor failure. If you are a confident home mechanic, this work can be done at home with the right tools, but many specialists are familiar with these failures, so while it won't be cheap, it shouldn't be in the shop for very long. The transmission can suffer a low-speed vibration or hard shift that will usually then put a car into limp mode if not treated. The valve body or conductor plates can be an issue on the 7G variation. The 9G is more likely to be suffering a software issue or a mechatronic issue. The first step for many repair centres will be to replace the ATF, as many cars are on the transmission fluid they left the factory with. If this doesn't resolve the issue, then troubleshoot from the above mentioned problems. I should note though, I was able to find several reports of 2015 to 2017 GLE models fitted with a 9G transmission having a complete failure, with the only remedy being a full replacement. In most cases, the ones that were going to fail already have done so and have been replaced by late 2017, and 2018 cars appear to have fewer reports of this happening. Diesel buyers should note that emissions issues usually related to a failed NOx sensor or the AdBlue heater, and then if you're only doing short journeys, then the EGR or DPF clogging. You can get lucky and just need a software reset and update, but usually it's expensive hardware that will need replacing to resolve emissions issues. Then an issue that sounds cheap to repair but has quickly escalated to expensive repairs was the power tailgate, which may stop opening or closing and will usually be down to a worn actuator or strut of the control module that needs replacing. Most replaced units will then need recalibration. This next batch are common but fall into the middle range. Panoramic roof noise or rattles may just be a fastener needing adjusting or tightening, or a lubrication of the seals. There was a technical service bulletin for a batch of cars with this issue that did help with goodwill gestures for repairs from the dealer. The control module for the headlights that directs the daylight running style lights can fail and will need a replacement LED control unit along with recoding. Wheel bearings starting to clunk or hum after the 10-year marker on average mileage cars. It is worth driving over a few bumps and listening out for any clunking that can sometimes be a bushing or front links, and some specialists will assess all components and suggest a replacement of several items at one time if they are looking tired, saving some money on labour but making it a costly repair bill. Petrol engines can suffer an oil seep issue that will cause several failures of sensors and even one of the looms running to the main ECU module if left unchecked. Fortunately, it will show itself through a misfire and a cold start rattle early on, so as long as you get the car repaired early, usually by resealing the timing cover and fitting updated parts if identified you have the older ancillaries, then you should avoid the costlier end of issues. And remember, this isn't an especially common problem. Moving on to the rarer end of reported faults. Steering racks did report early failures on some cars and will show an EPS fault, although this should have presented by now if it is an issue on a car you are viewing. Then the reverse camera was known for glitching, but an updated command unit resolved the issue. Moving on to recalls, and a reminder to consider becoming a channel member. Not only do you get videos released early, but you'll support our work. In 2016, there were 3 recalls that were announced, starting with the select 2015 and 16 built cars due to an anchor bolt in the rear right-hand seatbelt being incorrectly installed, followed by a headlight on early GLE built cars needing adjustment due to a low beam pattern, and then rear axle carrier bolts needing a check on cars built up to 2016 due to incorrect assembly at factory. In 2017, there were 2 recalls. The first was to add additional sealant to the EPS connectors on 2016 and 2017 GLEs, and then a late 2017 recall affected 2017 and the first 2018 model year cars due to excess bulkhead insulation being added at factory, which could put excessive pressure on the windscreen and attach the bonding agent around the glass. In 2018, there was a single recall for active curve systems on 2012 to 2017 cars for a check to assess a leak risk. In 2019, another single recall, this time for an e-call system needing module software updates, although this recall only affected a small batch of GLE cars. In 2022, another single recall for water collecting in the spare wheel well and damaging the fuel pump control unit on 2012 to 2019 built cars. And then in 2023, there were 2 recalls. The first is noted as EU only, but may be extended to other markets and was due to steering gear bolts having notes of corrosion from 2012 to 2017 built cars. Then the earlier 2022 recall for water ingress in the spare wheel well was opened out to a wider batch of vehicles, including those sold in Australia up to 2018. Now onto the engines, and this generation had petrol and diesel along with plug-in hybrid. Let's start with petrol, or as you may call it, gas engine. A popular but lower power option was the 3.5-litre V6, badged ML and GLE 350, coded M276, making 302 brake horsepower and built from launch in the ML and stretching into the GLE facelift, although most markets phased out the 3.5 from around 2016. Fuel economy was averaged at 27 miles per gallon in the USA. European testing scored it slightly higher, with a metric of 8.5 litres per 100 kilometres. While this is one of the simplest engines offered, there are still a few points to be aware of when looking used. Primarily, a common report from owners was oil leaks from the front timing seals and a failure of the camshaft adjusters causing a rattling noise and causing a fault code to show. Diving deeper, I could find reports of timing chain tensioner failures causing a rattle on high mileage cars and water pumps along with a thermostat housing failure. However, while I've named some fairly critical issues, overall owners find that the engine just needs a good service routine, but this should be one of the better options if you're running towards high mileage and want to keep the simplest car for repairs. A final note though is that looking for high mileage cars, ask if the valves have ever been blasted clean. If not, then doing so might release a bit of performance and fuel economy that has been lost with time. Then it's the smaller but more powerful bi-turbocharged 3-litre V6, coded M276, and fitted to the ML and GLE models badged 400 and a tweaked version of the GLE 43 AMG. The GLE 43 AMG was initially a GLE 450 AMG Sport, and these cars have the same engine. A side note was that the select markets, including China, got a 320 model with this engine that was detuned. Power is rated at 328 brake horsepower with a detuned version of 272 brake horsepower, and then AMG and the 450 getting 362 brake horsepower, while some markets got a late upgrade, increasing power further to 385 brake horsepower. A last quick note here is the ML did get this engine in pre-facelift cars, but it was only the final few months before the facelift, and they will be badged ML400. Late versions of the MLG model also receive a 9-speed auto. Fuel economy was tested on the older and less accurate NEDC test cycle and scored the car at 30.7 miles per gallon or 9.2 litres per 100 kilometres, but few owners report achieving this. As you likely noted, the engine coding is the same as the earlier 3.5 and they are the same family, so the issues named earlier are also reported on this engine, but the addition of turbocharging has seen some reports of oil leaks around the turbochargers and seals failing, which then allow oil to enter the intercooler. Thankfully, these reports are fairly spread out at the moment, but will be something to watch as these engines age. Ignition coils failing will be an obvious on test drive because you will hear a misfire and shouldn't be left long before a repair. On the positive, there were some good owner responses saying that they had a used Mercedes specialist, and while 1 or 2 services had been more than they expected, the car had been perfectly reliable for their ownership So, willing to spend for the very best servicing and be proactive with catching small issues early, and you increase your chances of having trouble-free motoring with this engine, even in the higher power guise. The engine sizes then step up for the twin-turbo V8 engine fitted to the ML and GLE. It will either be badged 500 or 550, depending on where you live, and be fitted with a 4.7 motor coded M278. Power is initially 402 brake horsepower on the ML, and then steps up to 423 brake horsepower for the GLE. Europeans got a late power boost to 427 brake horsepower. Fuel economy is rated at 21 miles per gallon by the US, while in Europe a slightly optimistic 11 litres per 100 kilometres was quoted. Expect both figures to be a best case scenario. The big plus to the high fuel bill, aside from the added power, will be the owner feedback of robust reliability, although much costlier servicing. The V8 isn't perfect, and timing chain tensioners on the ML models will fail with a cold start rattle to warn you. These require a fairly time-heavy repair, and even a specialist that knows the engine inside out will need a good amount of time to work on a total of 3 chains and 3 tensioners to get the system right if it causes an issue. The GLE had these parts updated and are more reliable. Valve guides reported heavy wear on their first builds in 2012 and into 2013, with upgraded items fitted from late 2013, and timing chain covers can suffer oil leaks. If the cover is not the cause of the cam sensor, will be the next place to check. Another step up in engine size to 5.5 litres, and the bi-turbo boosting gives us an ML and GLE 63 AMG, followed by the late edition of the GLE 63S. In the ML, power is rated at 518 brake horsepower, with an optional performance pack boosting this to 549 brake horsepower, which becomes the standard power on the facelift GLE, with a further boost to the additional GLE 63S, rated at 577 brake horsepower. Engines are coded M157. All engines run through an enhanced version of the 7-speed auto. Fuel economy will vary in real-world on driving style. Official tests manages to score 19 miles per gallon in the USA, with a slightly better 23.9 miles per gallon in the UK thanks to the larger gallon. But most Europeans and Australians say the 11.8 litres per 100 kilometres is optimistic for anything but a steady cruise. This engine uses the architecture of the less powerful V8 in the 500 or 550, so shares its robust nature, but with added power comes added stress, and notes of early cars having a timing chain stretch and ignition system issues, with coil packs and spark plugs reporting premature wear. One note for buyers looking at the earlier ML will be reports of bore scoring. Mercedes changed the material used on the cylinder walls for the GLE to nanoslide, which appears to resolve the issue, but buyers up to 2015 should get the cylinders boroscoped if they want to have peace of mind that the engine will last them. After that, there are the diesels, which were much more popular in many parts of the world markets, but especially in Europe. Starting with the smallest engine in the entire GLE lineup, we have the 2.1 litre bi-turbo coded OM651 and badged ML250 Bluetec, then GLE 250D and GLE 300D, making 201 brake horsepower. I'll note that the US had the engine for 2 years in the GLE, badged 300D. All GLE models get the 9-speed auto, while the ML gets the 7-speed. For those outside the USA, this engine was offered from launch and lasted until August 2009 as production of the GLE slowed. Fuel economy is rated on the older, less accurate test, giving a reported 47 miles per gallon or 6 litres per 100 kilometres, while owners say that low 40s is possible and mid-30s MPG is more realistic for everyday driving. Some European Mercedes using this engine in taxis, like the E-Class, have run 400,000 kilometres on this engine, so overall it is a robust unit, possible of lasting for high mileage, but it isn't perfect, and as it builds mileage, these areas are commonly reported as having issues are the cooling system, usually the thermostat housing, then the water pump, and critically the timing chain and guides, which can start to rattle. There are also reports of stretched timing chains, frequent enough that if it hasn't been replaced, you should seriously consider doing so on a used buy. Common issues that are less mileage dependent, though, include some of the plastic components cracking, for example the charge air pipe or coolant pipes. Any leaking oil patches under the car should be checked to make sure a turbo hasn't blown a seal. This isn't that common, but costly if it happens. However, lots of new owners felt that the smaller diesel wasn't enough power for their needs, and so there is the 3-litre V6 turbo diesel in the ML350 BlueTec and GLE 350D, making 258 brake horsepower. This engine is a carryover design from the earlier ML that was updated to meet newer emission standards, and for many, it is offered from the start to the end of production, although early cars used the 7-speed gearbox and the facelift GLEs used the 9-speed. Fuel economy is rated at 39 miles per gallon, or 7.2 litres per 100 kilometres, with most owners content with early 30s MPG for mixed driving. While these are fairly robust up to high miles, these engines can suffer an oil cooler leak, and it will be a messy repair as this sits in the V of the engine. A technical bulletin to Mercedes dealers enforced an upgrade of the seals to Viton if not used at factory, and this goes a long way to resolving the issue. Residue buildup in the intake manifold is another hotspot issue, which should create an engine management light. I did find some 2011 to 2014 cars reporting timing chain failure, but this wasn't common enough to be a major concern, and it is likely to have already failed on a car if this was a problem. But again, if planning to keep the car for high mileage, then paying out to get the chains and tensioner replaced before they cause any issues is prudent. To round out possible issues, check the service history for replacement thermostat housings. If it's on the original factory item, it's a worthy preventative maintenance job in the future. Again, I was able to find Mercedes with this engine having giant mileage for well-kept examples. The hybrid offering was badged GLE 500e 4MATIC and paired the turbo V6 petrol engine I mentioned earlier in the GLE 400 with an 85 kilowatt electric motor and modest 8.8 kilowatt hour battery for a combined output of 436 brake horsepower to compete against the V8 model. Both fuel economy and estimated range are inaccurate from the official testing, so I'll say 10 to 12 miles of electric range, and the official economy of nearly 100 miles per gallon just isn't realistic, but expect fuel economy similar to the smaller diesel engines, and if you regularly do short commutes and have a charging at home, this can be a good used option, but I'll note these were not popular in many countries, and so your choices will be limited. On the plus side, while the engine reliability carries over from the earlier GLE 400, the hybrid system is fairly reliable, although I had to note that this is a much smaller sample size than other engines on the list. If an issue occurs, it is usually a failure of the high voltage relay or software issues draining the battery. A more common issue is a failure of the regular 12-volt battery. On to our picks, and if you're looking to keep a car for a long time, then the V6 diesel will require strict servicing and a willingness to spend money every time the garage notes you of the first signs of an issue, but doing so should mean a very high mileage ahead of you. For a higher budget pick, the 43 AMG or 400 model blend performance and fuel economy, while only the committed will be willing to stand the running costs of the higher powered 63 model. If you aren't sure on the GLE, we have guides for the BMW X5, Audi Q7 and Range Rover Sport, along with many other competitors to check out next.